She said, "I'm keeping the apartment. You move out. I like it here." After I confronted her about cheating, it was my apartment, my name alone on the lease. I said, "I'll start packing." Then I packed her stuff instead, changed the locks, and left it all in the hallway. When she came home from her business trip, original post: "I'm 31M, and I work double shifts at a logistics company. I pay my bills on time. I keep my head down, and I'm generally not the kind of person who ends up with a story worth telling." So the fact that I'm sitting here typing this out is honestly still a little surreal to me. My girlfriend and I had been together for 3 years. She moved into my apartment about 18 months ago. My apartment, my name on the lease, only my name. I want to establish that clearly right now because it becomes the entire foundation of everything that happens later. She had a solid job, marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm downtown. She was smart, put together, had this effortless charm about her. The kind of person who walks into a room and makes everyone feel like they're the most interesting person there. I thought I was lucky. Turns out that quality, the making everyone feel special thing, she wasn't exactly selective about who she used it on. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. Our warehouse ran a half shift because of a systems failure, and I got home around 4 p.m. instead of my usual 9. She was still at work. The apartment was quiet, but her laptop was sitting open on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications from an app one didn't immediately recognize. I wasn't snooping. I was literally just walking to the fridge. The screen lit up with a message preview from a contact she'd saved as client. R. Last night was everything. When do I get you again? I stood there and read it twice. Then I walked to the couch and sat down and stared at the wall for a while. I didn't say anything to her that night. I'm not a reactive person by nature, and I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with before I opened my mouth. So I started paying attention. Real attention. The kind you stop paying when you've been comfortable in a relationship for too long. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed things I'd been too settled to notice before. The business trips were picking up in frequency. Her phone was always face down when I walked into a room. She'd come home from what she called happy hours with colleagues smelling like hotel soap. Little things. But they added up. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't need to. I just documented. Dates, times, screenshots when I could get them on the occasions she left her phone unlocked nearby. What I put together over those 2 weeks wasn't circumstantial. It was a clear picture. She'd been seeing this guy, a senior account manager at one of her client companies, for at least 7 months. That's nearly half our relationship. She'd taken actual trips with him. Trips she'd told me were work conferences. The cheating was bad. But reading through those messages, something else hit me harder. She'd been venting about me to him, called me boring, said I was too stable. Like that was an insult. Said she was trying to figure out the right time to move on. She wasn't conflicted. She wasn't struggling with anything. She had already emotionally checked out and was just running out the clock while living rent-free in my apartment. Eating food I bought, waiting to land somewhere better. That detail right there, that's what switched something off in me. Not hot anger. Something colder. More deliberate. I said nothing for 3 more days and spent that time making phone calls. First, I called my landlord and explained the situation. He confirmed what I already knew. Her name was nowhere on the lease. He'd had 0 communication with her in any official capacity, and he had no obligation to her whatsoever. Then I called a locksmith and got a quote. Then I priced out a storage unit near our building and paid for 1 month up front. Then I made a detailed list of everything in the apartment, mine versus hers. Then I waited for her next business trip. She announced it on a Wednesday evening. Casual as anything. I've got that conference in Atlanta this weekend. Flying out Friday morning, back Sunday night. She didn't even look up from her phone when she said it. Okay, I said, safe travels. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and went to bed. Friday morning, she rolled her carry-on out the door. I watched her go, gave it 30 minutes to be sure she hadn't forgotten anything. And then I got to work. I bought flat-rate moving boxes earlier that week. I had tape, markers, everything ready. I started in the bedroom. Her clothes, every single item, folded and packed into labeled boxes. I wasn't being destructive about it. I was actually more careful with her stuff than she ever was. Her skincare products from the bathroom, her shoes from the closet, the decorative throw pillows she'd insisted on buying, the framed photos of her family wrapped in newspaper, her books, her journals, her little collection of ceramic animals from the windowsill. All of it, packed, labeled by category, stacked neatly in the living room. It took most of Friday and part of Saturday. I rented a cargo van, loaded everything up, and drove it to the storage unit. Inside the unit, I left a note taped to the door with the access code written on it and the unit address. I wasn't trying to steal anything or hold her belongings hostage. I just needed her stuff out of my space. Saturday afternoon, the locksmith came. New deadbolt, new handle lock, fresh keys cut. I left one envelope taped to the outside of the apartment door. Inside was the storage unit address, the access code, and one sentence on plain paper. Your belongings are safe. The lease is in my name. This conversation is over. Then I packed a bag, drove to my buddy's place across town, and waited. She landed Sunday night. I know because the call started at 9:47 p.m. I didn't answer. Then came the text, "Why is my key not working?" This isn't funny. Open the door. Then, once she found the envelope, "Are you serious right now? You can't do this. I live here." I turned my phone over and went to sleep. Monday morning, I called in a personal day because I knew it was coming and I wanted to be present for it. She showed up outside my buddy's building at 8 a.m., calling my phone from the sidewalk. I went down. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologetic. She was furious. Arms crossed, jaw set. "You had no right to touch my things," she said the second I walked out. "They're in storage. You have the address and the code. I want back in that apartment. Your name isn't on the lease." She pulled out her phone. "I already talked to someone this morning. You can't just remove a person from a residence. I have tenant rights. I'd looked into this specifically. In my state, an unlisted occupant who has been residing somewhere for more than 30 days can potentially claim informal occupancy status, but only if they can demonstrate they've been paying rent or have some written agreement in place." She had never paid rent. Not once. There was no lease addendum, no written agreement, nothing with her name on it. What she had was a storage unit access code and a lot of confidence. "You're welcome to talk to whoever you want," I said, "but you were never on the lease, and you never paid rent. You were a guest." "I bought groceries," she said. I genuinely had no response to that for a second. Good luck presenting grocery receipts as a tenancy agreement. She said she was going to call the police. I told her she could. She did. 2 officers showed up. She explained that she'd been locked out of her home. They asked if her name was on the lease. She said it wasn't, but she'd been living there. They looked at me. I pulled up the lease on my phone. Full document. My name only. The officers were polite, but direct, without her name on the lease or documented rent payments establishing tenancy. This was a civil matter, and they had no authority to compel me to grant her access. If she believed she had a legal claim, she could consult an attorney and pursue it in civil court. She screamed at them on the sidewalk. Actual screaming. One officer calmly repeated that they couldn't help her and suggested she make arrangements for the evening. She turned back to me. "You think you're so smart." "I think I'm done," I said, and went back inside. I genuinely thought that was going to be the end of it. I was wrong. Within 48 hours, she tracked down my mother's number, probably through social media, and called to a version of events where I had gone crazy and thrown her out with nothing. My mother called me concerned. I forwarded her the screenshots. Every single conversation. The messages from client, R. The trip dates that lined up with her conferences. The messages where she called me boring and talked about her exit plan. My mother did not call her back. Then she tried to get into the storage unit by going to the front desk and claiming she'd lost her access and needed to get in under my credentials. The facility called me because I was the account holder. I confirmed she had full access under her own name and code, but that nobody should be granted access using my information. They flagged the account. Then came a formal letter. Not a court filing, just a letter from an attorney she'd apparently hired, claiming she had established de facto tenant status, through long-term occupancy and was seeking either reinstatement of access to the apartment or financial compensation for wrongful removal. The letter cited general tenant protection language, but was short on actual specifics. I took it to my own attorney for a consultation. He read it, put it down, and said she had no case. No lease, no rent payments, no written agreement. Under my state's law, she was a licensee, not a tenant. And licensees could be asked to leave it with no legal obligation to provide notice or relocation assistance. He drafted a formal response on my behalf that laid out the legal basis clearly and noted that any attempt to pursue court action would be met with a counterclaim for harassment. Her attorney never responded to that letter, but she wasn't finished. She showed up at my job, walked into the logistics company reception, and asked to speak with me. My supervisor came to find me with a look on his face that told me something was off before he said a word. I went out front, and she was standing there, completely composed now, dressed professionally. She dropped the fury entirely and switched to a different mode. Calm, soft-spoken, the victim version of herself. "I just want to talk," she said quietly, in front of 3 co-workers who were very obviously pretending to look at their screens. "We have nothing to talk about," I said. "I deserve an explanation." "You got one." It was taped to the door. "You can't treat a person this way." I looked at her for a moment. "I'm at work. Please leave, or I'll ask security to walk you out." She left, but showing up there wasn't random. She came specifically to create a public scene, to make me look like the aggressive one in front of people who only had her version of the story. It was calculated. It just didn't work the way she intended. My supervisor asked me quietly later if everything was all right. I gave him the short version. He nodded and said to let him know if she came back. She didn't. What she did instead was post on social media. A long, carefully worded post about betrayal and being removed from a home without warning and not being treated as a human being. Nothing provably false, just curated enough to paint a picture. Mutual friends started texting me. I didn't post anything. I just replied to each person individually with the screenshots, not as a coordinated campaign, just as an answer to the question they were all implicitly asking. Her post came down within 4 days. Now here's the part one genuinely did not see coming. About 3 weeks after everything went down, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Male voice, calm, professional. It was client, the guy she'd been seeing. He wasn't calling to threaten me or start anything. He was calling because the social media fallout had apparently reached people connected to him, and he'd pieced together that she had been with me the entire time they were seeing each other. He'd been under the impression she was single. She'd told him she lived alone. She'd told him she'd ended a long-term relationship over a year ago and was just figuring out her next move. He had no idea I existed. We ended up talking for about 20 minutes. 2 people who had never met. Both lied to in parallel. Comparing notes with a kind of flat, exhausted humor that comes from realizing you've both been played simultaneously by the same person. He told me that as recently as the week she came back from Atlanta, she'd been asking him whether he'd consider letting her move in with him. He'd been genuinely emotionally invested in her. He'd been close to saying yes. Finding out she'd been deceiving him the whole time settled that question for him pretty definitively. He wasn't a villain in this. He was just another person she'd used as a chess piece without telling him the board existed. I don't know exactly where she landed after all of this. What I do know through a mutual contact is that things got complicated professionally for her because the nature of her relationship with someone at a client company became known internally at her firm, and that created problems she had to deal with. I had nothing to do with that. That was just consequence doing its own thing. My apartment is quiet now. I repainted the bedroom, rearranged the furniture, and got rid of the throw pillows. She had 3 years of my time, 18 months rent-free in my space, and she spent the last 7 months of it planning her exit and calling me boring to a guy she was sneaking around with. I spent 3 weeks being methodical, and I walked away with my apartment, my dignity, and a pretty solid story.